So thank you everyone for coming to today's webinar about improved developer experience by optimizing Java environments by JRebel. We have some fantastic work coming in here from Perforce, who has done quite a bit of research in that area. My name's Eric Kostel. I'm a member of the InfoQ Java Editors Queue. I actually do so much Java work that I have a fantastic Brick Duke kit right here sitting next to me. Those are really fun. And a couple months ago, I was at Gradle's Developer Productivity Engineering Summit out in San Francisco. And at that conference, the people up on stage, completely unprompted, were talking about the benefits of monorepo versus multi-repos. And they had a lot of really good things to say about Perforce in particular, which wasn't even a topic at the conference. They just came in and started saying some nice things about it. So I'm really looking forward to hearing this, especially when I hear unprompted positive feedback about something in the wild. Always a great opportunity. So with that, I want to hand the presentation over to Rod Cope, the CTO who is going to give us a lot of outstanding material on developer experience of how you can improve everything for your Java developers.
All right, thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. Speaking of the Duke that you have, which is pretty cool. I've been in Java a long time myself. Sun certified Java architect back in 1999, and brought Java into Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield in 1995 when I was there, and I was lucky enough to be a Java 1 rock star 3 years in a row for presenting at that big conference when we had it, which was good times. So we'll jump into this. We're going to talk a lot about developer experience and how to make things better. And then we'll have a little bit of a Q&A and a discussion at the end. So without further ado, Courtney, if we can go to the next slide. That's me, Rod Cope, CTO. As I mentioned, been in Java a long time. Been a CTO now for about 25 years. Before then, kind of came up through the ranks as a developer, tech lead, team lead, object-oriented designer, architect, chief architect, etc. Java very heavy, and yeah, we'll talk about some things near and dear to my heart when we talk about how to make lives of developers easier. So next slide. All right, defining developer experience. Easy to say, a lot harder to do something about it that developers actually like. So let's go to the next slide where we'll see the actual definition. Okay, so the words here are fairly simple. Developer experience focuses on points of friction in developer workflow and level of satisfaction developers derive from their jobs. Small sentence, but really powerful. If you kind of think about what the analysts have said, especially like Red Monk and Stephen O'Grady back in the day, saying developers are kings and queens, right? As how their lives go has a direct impact on your business results, your revenue, your outcome, etc. Meaning that they have so much power when it comes to the environment, the tools, what they choose, how they work, which vendors they're willing to work with, and how. And it's not just driven top down like in the maybe bad old days or good old days, depending on your perspective, where those decisions were kind of made centrally and forced out. We're seeing more and more of the power go to developers to recommend and bring things in and bring tools and processes they found from conferences and peers and vendors they like, and reject ones they don't. So it's really important, not just, yeah, job satisfaction, absolutely important, but it's far more than that. Developers will bring in other developers if they like where they work. So you get word of mouth and better referencing. It's easier to hire. It's easier to retain key talent if they're happy, if they like what they do, if they're not spending all day spinning their wheels on overhead, for example. So this is key. You can't really overstate just how important the developer experience is on the results of the business, not just the developer day to day. If we go to the next slide. All right, so where's the developer's time go? I think we might be pretty generous showing that big green coding circle. If you think about this as a percentage of the day, I think it could easily be the other side where the coding circle is very small, like 10% of what a developer does, where everything else is certainly seen by most developers as just something getting in the way of coding, whether it's attending meetings. I've yet to meet a developer who likes meetings. In fact, usually most developers, if they have one meeting a week, it's too much and they're complaining about meetings. Completing processes, any kind of overhead of paperwork, rigid structure, jumping through hoops, filling out requests to maybe get access to machines or get access to resources or HR reports, etc. Tickets, reports, any overhead if you're using systems, which everybody does, and you need to, things like Jira or whatever else. We'll talk about ways to streamline, but developers don't want to spend much time in there. It's a necessary requirement, but it doesn't bring them value. It doesn't bring joy. It's just something you have to do, gets in the way. And then something like waiting on redeploys is a big one, especially depending on your application. Eric mentioned mono repos, and yeah, personally I could talk for probably hours about microservices versus monoliths and in the pros and cons, but there's a lot of good things to be said about monoliths and single repos. Anything that simplifies an environment means less to keep track of if you're a developer. It means everybody's on the same page and you can go much faster as opposed to having hundreds of moving parts in various different ways. But waiting on redeploys is one of those things that, yeah, you have to deal with if you're a developer of any kind. And I mentioned Anthem and me bringing Java into the company in 1995. Before that was all C++ shop. And we literally had a 1 hour and 10-minute compile process. So you'd write code, you'd make a change, you'd hope you got everything right, you crammed in as much as you could because you knew you had to sit there and do nothing for an hour and 10 minutes before you could actually see, oh, did it work? Oh, I got a compile error, start over. Java made that a lot better in so many different ways, but you still, if you change your code, you still have to build and deploy and then get back to the state you were in the last time you made a change and you want to test. If you're tweaking a UI, you might have to wait quite a few minutes in a lot of cases just to, oh, I got everything done and redeployed, now I have to log in and get back to where it was. Wasted time. So all these things where developers' time go, if it's not writing code and moving things forward, it doesn't help the business and it doesn't make developers happy. So I think we have a poll question about your pain. Which redeployment struggle is the bigger one for your team? Is it how long everyone takes or how often you do it? Like, are you ideally making changes and pushing 10 times an hour where you want to see your results, you want to run tests manual or you're tweaking things, experimenting, whatever? Or is it just, I don't need to do it that often, but it's a real pain to sit and wait for minutes at a time. You get out of flow, you get distracted, you start surfing the web or checking email, and next thing you know, you lost a bunch of coding time. So if you could take a few seconds and fill out that poll, that would be great. We'll kind of look at your results and compare to what we've seen in our other surveys that we've done with our enterprise customers. Okay. Oh wow. It looks like we got a dead tie. It's a dead heat. So exactly half of the respondents said length and half says frequency. Well, means they're both a problem, right? Which is not surprising. If you deploy several times in an hour and they all take a few minutes, you just chewed up a big chunk of that hour, really getting nothing done, sitting around and waiting. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So from our previous survey results in our 2024 Java Developer Productivity Report that we put out, we found a number of obstacles to productivity. So the things we talked about, too many tasks also being kind of at the top of the list from the respondents, just not enough focus, too many things in the queue, too many concurrent projects or concurrent stories, or working with too many different teams, etc. And you just spin in a circle all day, too many emails, too many Slacks, whatever it is. And a lot of that can be driven by communication issues, especially if you've got teams, distributed multiple geographies. Maybe you've got a team in India or China or somewhere in Eastern Europe, and maybe you're spread around the US. Maybe you have all of the above, and they're all trying to work together on the same team. A lot of overhead, a lot of challenges just keeping people up to date and dealing with time zones. That can be a real problem, especially in larger enterprises. Redeploy time, not surprising. That was about 22% of respondents saying, hey, waste a lot of time here, sitting around. Mismanaged timelines, kind of a project management catch-all bucket. Again, coordinating a lot of teams. There's a lot of moving parts, especially if you're using microservices, or you've got highly distributed technologies and architectures. That leads to potentially highly distributed teams, and now the overhead just went up. So all these things fit together. Right? You can see too many tasks, and those tasks are spread across teams with complex timelines and interlocking dependencies. And on top of that, you've got the technical issues of sitting around. Nobody's happy with this. Doesn't help developer experience. Okay, I think we also have a poll about this, asking, where do you fit in? Where are your biggest obstacles, personally or in the teams maybe that you direct or manage, other teams that you work with? Is it just too much stuff on the plate? Maybe the teams are too big, you have communication challenges, or you have too many teams, or they're spread across geography, so communication is tough. Again, redeploy times, just kind of twiddling your thumbs, wishing the machine would go faster. Or project management, kind of overhead. Right? And dealing with dependencies is a real pain. Versioning APIs, versioning open source components in your stack, trying to get everybody aligned. That can eat up a lot of valuable cycles without much benefit. All right, got a little bit of a mix here. So it looks like communication is the biggie on this one, 58%. Not surprising, maybe that's kind of related to the size of the companies that the respondents work in. The larger the company, usually the more challenging this is. If you're in a startup with 5 people, communication not so tough. If your team is 50 people spread all over the place, then yeah, we can talk about some ways to help, but it's just a challenge. Too many tasks. Yep, that's a perennial favorite. And yep, see redeploy time sitting there too. This is taking up a chunk of the day. Nice to see there's no mismanaged timelines. So that's a really good thing. So either you've got good project managers, good product owners and product managers, or maybe you've been lucky. But whatever it is, yeah, be thankful that you don't have those issues too. All right, let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about some of the specifics that influence developer experience. So in the environment itself, hopefully you've got enterprise-ready tools and frameworks. We'll talk about a little bit of the differences of what makes an enterprise-grade tool, enterprise-ready tool, and freedom. I think this is a big deal. Letting developers have some choice. What tools, especially when it comes to editors, IDEs, things like that are. There's a lot of personal preference involved. It doesn't hurt the business that much to let developers have some freedom, some flexibility, maybe even some budget to spend on tools they like each year to make sure they're happy, because this is kind of like having a big monitor. It might seem like an expense, but you make developers happy, you make their lives better, and they're more productive. Morale is higher. It's a cheap investment. Same thing goes with developer tools. You're using those tools every day, all the time, constantly. And almost all developer tools realistically are super cheap if they help a developer, because you spend a lot of time and effort using those tools, and developers aren't cheap. So get good ones that they like and let them have some choice. Don't force them to use common tools and frameworks unless it's important. So I'd say pick your battles if you're in management. Sometimes, yes, it makes perfect sense. We need to standardize on something. Maybe when it comes to a certain middleware component, or obviously a a database, if you're not using microservices and you've got shared teams using the same kind of infrastructure, you want to align on infrastructure, or you just have more overhead than it's worth. Too many herding cats at that point. So pick your battles, give flexibility when you can, and be conscious about it. Overhead, just a number of tasks a developer has to do every day that's not coding time can be easily 10 to 80%. I have seen this myself. I worked in multiple enterprises. In addition to Anthem, I've worked at GE and IBM Global Services. I've also consulted for Ericsson and other places before becoming a CTO. And I've seen it. I've seen that 80% number. That overhead is real, and it does hurt morale. It obviously impacts the business. So do your best, and again, upcoming slides, maybe talk about some examples, but do your best to minimize this. And then finally, developer tools. I mentioned enterprise grade. Some of the differences there, if you look at, for example, some free and open source, and I'm the CTO and founder of a company called OpenLogic that's all about open source. So I know and like and love open source. But if you're looking for an enterprise ready tool and you go straight to community for something free, you're going to add friction to the process. Maybe that means you have to deal with the lack of SSO, or you have to deal with lack of key features, or it's hard to track or manage, or to get reports on usage, or it doesn't integrate as well with your other tools, etc. So you pay, obviously, for those things. So if you're in an enterprise, use enterprise-ready tools. It's worth it to reduce, again, the friction. Take away the irritation from the developers so they don't have to think about logging in and connecting and, oh, there's a bug, I got to go fix it myself in the tool, things like that. Pay to get support, to have somebody to call. So use enterprise tools if you're in an enterprise, and paying developers to do work. And then finally, a biggie, and this is going to be huge for years and years to come, well, really forever, changing the face of all things in software development, is AI. So AI assisted coding, and we talk about automating tedious and error-prone tasks. I think it goes way beyond coding to all parts of the software development lifecycle. And that includes testing, all sorts of automation, interactive development, creating pull requests, and automatically commenting, doing code reviews. There's so much more. So stay tuned, because I think we have another slide coming up on that. If we come to the next slide, I'll touch on AI some more. Right, so use AI anywhere it can help with tedious, time-consuming coding and other processes that the developers go through. Maybe that's even doing things like helping create stories, working with product owners and product management. Maybe that's turning those stories into tests, generating requirements, specs, and things like that. AI is very good at understanding and summarizing English and natural language in particular. So use those tools, generate skeletons. If you're going to use a new library, a new framework, use AI to jumpstart that process. Use the co-pilots and things that are available. So anything that lets you go faster and cut out some of the grunt work so that you spend more time as developer and developer teams focused on what matters, and that's delivering value to the business, and have the AI do more of the low-level bits, so you become more of a supervisor, a director, and kind of outlining what you need, critiquing it, and tweaking input for the AI to do some of the work. We'll see more and more of that over time. I would say keep new processes as simple and lightweight as possible. Easier said than done, because especially if you're in larger teams, if you're in a larger company, the default often is to have heavy process. Why? Usually because you have a lot of teams, a lot of people communicating, you have people tracking and managing and coordinating and dealing with dependencies and timelines and the other things we talked about. And that means the need to standardize. How do you standardize? You make people follow a standard process. Problem is, one size fits all tends to get bigger and heavier over time, not smaller and lighter. So I would say, and as we continue the conversation, I would say always stop and think very explicitly and consciously as a group before you add a new process step or slow things down or add a new gate to say, do we need this? Is it worth it? Is the pain we're trying to take away, is it more important to remove that pain than adding the process, which is another kind of pain? It's a trade-off. So just be explicit about that trade-off, that yes, we do want to do this. Don't just do it implicitly. And I'd say push back on that if somebody's trying to add process onto you. Ask why. Is it really necessary? Will this help us get more value to the business? Test and implement development tools. You don't stop learning. There's always new approaches. We've mentioned redeployment a number of times. That's an example where there are good tools like JRebel that can help. So experiment, try it out, see if it works for you. And if it does, roll it out. If it doesn't, don't use it. Try something else. But always think about, can we do a better job? Can we be more efficient? Can we go faster? Can we make developers' lives better so that they get more done? And then another tough one, keep meetings focused and into a minimum. The whole extreme programming movement came about, and the concept of stand-up meetings because this was out of control. I would say the vast majority of stand-up meetings are not stand-up. It doesn't happen. If you did stand up, they would be shorter. I'm not saying you have to stand up, but I'm saying come with a clear objective and expect some meaningful results out of a meeting. If you don't come in knowing what you want to get out, it's going to drag on and you won't get value. So come in with a tight focus, a tight agenda, and expect to get real results. Because again, developers don't like meetings. This is pure overhead. Even if they ask for a meeting because they want to learn something about a business or another team, etc., after about 5 minutes, they've drifted off to something else. Nobody likes extra meetings, especially developers. So minimize. Okay, enough on that topic. Next slide.
You know what, Rod, before we move on, let's hear what the audience has to say and which strategies they're implementing with a poll.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Great.
Okay. So yeah, what strategies are you employing where you work to encourage developer productivity or improve developer experience, for example? So we've got AI tools. That would be great to hear if you're using things like GitHub Copilot or Cursor or any of those kinds of tools to go faster, do more, better. If you've done well with implementing lightweight processes and resisted the urge to make them heavier weight over time, anything you do to increase productivity. Maybe you've got a productivity team, some work group or something that's specifically looking for opportunities to improve productivity, to cut out the red tape and the overhead. Or maybe you're doing a good job of limiting meetings. That would be fantastic to hear too. So let us know in this poll what's working for you. All right, looks like there's some success with lightweight processes, which is great to hear. Maybe that's Agile or Scrum versus Waterfall, or maybe that's faster story pointing. Maybe that's planning poker or whatever it is. Good to hear, because that's a real killer of productivity. And it seems like, look, I'm very impressed to see 25% of the respondents have productivity teams or work groups. That's fantastic. It means you're taking this seriously, that developer productivity and experience matters. Like, how do we get better? How do we optimize our own processes? And hopefully that means you're getting results like even lighter weight processes. Go faster. Cut out the stuff that's not needed. And AI tools, I'd love to see that higher. 17% is a good start. I think we're going to see a huge increase next year in 2025. And hopefully we can add this to our own surveys in the State of Java report for next year. How fast are teams adopting AI tools? That would really be great. I think it's mandatory. If you don't do it, eventually you will not be competitive with all the players in your market that do. Because if you're digging with your own hands and somebody else is using a shovel, they're going to go faster. It's going to be the same with AI. And nice to see, again, limiting meetings. There's some of that happening and some other. So good. or making some progress, it looks like, as an industry here.
Say, Rod.
Okay, let's go to the next. Yeah.
You know what, before we do Rod, let's hit him with another poll, I think. Productivity and go hand in hand. So let's see what the audience has to say with what they do with a little bit more time.
Okay, perfect. So if you had 10% more development time, more coding time outside of meetings and all the stuff and dealing with processes and the things we talked about, what would you do? Would you use it to create new features? Would you improve performance or test coverage? Maybe address some of the technical debt in your test suite, for example, or your performance testing suite? Would you just launch faster? Time to market is critical. Or would you take time out and improve development processes, kind of like the optimization things we talked about with efficiency and those productivity teams? Would you work on that? That's a great set of options here. I'm very excited to see what we're going to get. Anytime not in a meeting is a good time. So any of these answers are going to be good. All right, looks like interesting. About half would say improve performance or test coverage. It's good to see. I mean, that's also a little bit of an indictment of, again, of our software industry that tends to be left for last. Unfortunately, things like performance testing and good automated code coverage tends to fall by the wayside a bit because it's hard, it's tedious to maintain and update, and gets out of date quickly. The maintenance burden is super high, and yeah, it's tough. So if you had more time, you'd invest in that and in new features. That's good. Nobody said they'd launch faster, which I do find interesting. So everybody wants the shiny button. Not surprising. Obviously, that's what a lot of product managers would want, but I would also personally love to see getting out to market faster. The faster you get out, the faster you get feedback, and the faster you can add the features that matter versus the ones that you hope will matter. That's my personal opinion. Okay, let's head back to the slides then. All right, well, I think that we got through the slides. We got through talking about the overhead, how to be more efficient, how to use lighter weight processes, how to use enterprise grade tools, and spend less time twiddling thumbs and instead of waiting for code to deploy and be ready to go, and lots about developer experience. So I think I will turn it over to Eric and see if we have questions.
One of the questions that came in, so we answered the main ones that come in just about the webinars. Will a recording be available? Yes. Can I get a transcript? Yes. One of the questions came in asking if it would be translated into Arabic. I can't say for certain on that. We do translate a lot of things. There's automated translations now. All the webinars do, I believe, have an English transcript that accompany them. So we'll go through and try to get you the things that we want. Otherwise, if anyone else has any questions, either type them into the chat, which I'm walking, or there's a question thing over in the right. So type your question there, and we can answer all of your questions live as we go. But one of the things I want to drill into, if you go back to one of the previous polls that asked people about where they spent a lot of their time. Let me see here. What's your team's biggest obstacle? They said communication issues. So that I think is interesting in particular because it's not a technical problem, but just what are some of the communication issues that people experience? Is it all across team? Is it sometimes intra-team? And what are the ways that you help manage that within your teams?
Yeah, it's a good example of using Perforce. We are globally distributed. We've got development in multiple points around the US and Canada and Europe and Asia as well, in India. Time zones are challenging, obviously. Language and culture, we also have a number of teams in Israel. So we do have some language and cultural challenges, but I'd say the main thing, what helps the most by far, is to have frequent on-camera meetings. We use Zoom. You can use whatever works for you, but be face-to-face with your colleagues and peers as much as possible, because that makes them real. It's not just an email address or somebody responding on Slack, which is fine, but it's somebody you can see and get feedback and treat as part of the overall team. You're all working together towards the same goals, and just the more you do that, the less it feels like I'm working with a third party or a partner, and more like it's just us. And it's somebody who happens to be working from home today. It doesn't really matter where. That really helps quite a bit.
Yeah, so in terms of that, it's kind of interesting. I have sitting right next to me here, we do a lot on developer framework training and things, but there is a literal book called Communication Patterns. It's one of the O'Reilly books, and it just covers a lot of how to communicate as an engineer with an engineer. So I use this for making sure that a lot of my communications are clear. Because a lot of the times, in terms of being an engineer talking to somebody else, there's the role of like an information pyramid, which is begin with the big picture first and then go into specifics on things.
Yeah, I think that is really helpful. Among other things at Perforce, so I lead our office of the CTO. I also lead our architecture review board. And a lot of that is connecting teams, breaking down silos, getting peers to talk to each other if maybe they haven't met before, or they don't know who to reach out to in a company. If you work for a bigger company, maybe you've been acquired. We acquire lots of companies as well. And so to have consistent processes to discuss things like the big picture, like you said, top down the pyramid, like here's where we're going, here's what matters to the business, and here's how we can get there together. That helps a lot too. So it's not just everybody kind of heads down working on their one thing in a silo. It's how do we work together to achieve some bigger picture goal? Yeah, very helpful.
And what are some of the ways that you think an individual engineer just working on a team whose primary focus is to do that coding, what are ways that they can deal with the communication challenges between teams that people cited here?
Well, I think one good example would be to bring it up with management. So when you're doing storyboarding, story planning, pointing, whatever it is, or whatever project planning mechanism you use, and you're working with your other teams and management, bring it up, explicitly, like, oh, how do we deal with some of these challenges? Maybe it's a time zone thing, or maybe it's a tool usage thing, or geography, or cultural. It just worked. I know this is very difficult for engineers, but just bring it up, surface it, and say, hey, something's not working. Don't be afraid to say that, because I think you get a lot better results faster if you kind of tear off that band-aid or point at the elephant in the room than if you don't, even though it is quite uncomfortable sometimes. You get way better results, and it lowers your stress dramatically to not be thinking, oh, I wish I would have said that, or I wish we'd deal with this, because the consequences aren't fun.
Yeah, and especially the first role is make a problem visible, make everybody aware of it, and then they can all deal with it, and you're more likely to get help.
Exactly.
Yep. So the next one there, it was that question was pretty split, the communication between teams that we covered, but the other is too many tasks. The majority of the time, an individual engineer doesn't necessarily have control over how many tasks that they have. So what are different ways that you can deal with if you feel like you have too many tasks? What approaches have you seen people be effective at managing the number of tasks that they do?
I think there's kind of some micro and some macro level answers to that. Better results long-term to address the macro version, and probably that means you either have too many people adding things to the list. Maybe you've got multiple projects you're working on, multiple product owners, or product owners and product managers aren't completely in sync, or you've got maybe VPs or directors stepping in and sprinkling things on top, and now suddenly you don't have one queue of work, you have 10, and everybody is wondering why their thing isn't getting done. That has to be addressed a little higher up And I think, honestly, you should push back a lot of that on your development manager, or maybe if they're not able to do it, a director, and say, look, it's again, this could be uncomfortable, but it's your role, basically, manager or director, to help us focus so we get things done. And if I'm spinning in a circle all day because I'm spinning all these plates, that doesn't help anybody. We're not going to succeed as a business. So that's the best result, if you can get somebody else to stop adding so many different things to the list. If you can't, then I mean you're going to have to do what engineers do is, when you provide your story points or your estimates, you're gonna have to say, well, I have to add buffer in for all the spinning I have to do, and the extra report, the filing, the TPS reports, whatever it is they're making me do, and see if somebody says, wow, that's a lot of overhead. Like, yeah, here's why. So help me, help you with that, and give me fewer things to do. They'll all get done faster with better quality, lower stress, higher morale, better results. It's just a fact. So what can we do to help get there?
Okay, so from an engineer perspective, it's in essence, make the problem visible again, make sure that it's visible on your story points of I'm being brought in to do these extra tasks that weren't necessarily planned. I have this much capacity. Here's what I spent it doing.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, the visibility is key, because a lot of times there will be expectations from others that are adding to the list, and they don't understand why it's taking so long, because they maybe don't realize that there's 5 other people they didn't know about also adding tasks to the list, or the tasks are all priority 1 AAA, right? And it's like, well, okay, if you have 20 things and they're all priority 1, it means you don't have any priorities whatsoever.
Right.
It's random at that point. And so you really have to rely on the people creating the list to do the prioritization, and that's a really, really hard thing to do, which is why it doesn't usually get done very well. But as an engineer, you have to surface that.
Okay, how about people who are in the role of engineering managers, of them picking out the role and communicating back of, I need to manage the workload for my teams. What techniques can they use?
You're talking about them reporting up, like working with their directors, et cetera.
Yeah, right. How can an engineering manager effectively take over that role for their team and say, look, my team is overburdened, my team's citing too many tasks, so to sort of act as a shield to keep those tasks out when other stakeholders come in and ask for more tasks?
Yeah, again, this is one of those things where the answer is very easy to say, and it's much harder to do, because development managers are in a sort of a tough position, right? They're expected to execute and get things done, but they're all nobody has a short list of things and extra time to do them. It's always the opposite. So it's, how do I keep my developers happy? How do I keep them out of meetings and reduce the overhead, and say no when the request is coming from on high? That's hard to do. They have to have a lot of kind of intestinal fortitude to say, hey, look, I can't add one more thing. We're maxed out. So help prioritize of these 5 things that we said are priority 1, which is really number 1. Like they have to step in between the incoming list and the developers. That's their job.
Okay, so we do have some questions that are coming in from the chat. I think I responded to the entire audience instead. There's questions about AI tools, of which one of these you've seen effective, of what are people using in terms of AI tools? Is it coding assistance? Is it other techniques? Like, what are the AI tools that you're seeing a lot of?
It's early days, so we're seeing a mix, right? So there's some tools, like, for example, people are just turning to ChatGPT and asking questions on, how do I do this? How do I implement this library? Write some code for me, fix this bug. What's wrong with this, right? The things we used to always go to Google for, now we're starting to go more and more to the AIs and ask the same question. Now Google, of course, is baking in Gemini and stuff into their search. ChatGPT is coming out with search, where they're competing. I think Meta is going to do the same. Multiple Chinese companies are doing the same. So we're going to have more and more options when it comes to that side. But for now, that's one. So just, I have a specific task, go to chat. I think we're seeing a lot of use of things like GitHub Copilot where now the AI is coming to you. It's getting baked into your IDE or editor. And there's the chat feature of that. In addition to code completion and the code things, there's also a chat baked in. So instead of going out to Google or ChatGPT, you can do it right in your IDE. Those are getting better. Sometimes you have really good results, sometimes you don't. It's a mixed bag. I think it depends a little bit on how big is your project, because right now the context window sizes are still fairly limited. So if you have a large complex code base, the AI can't get enough context to give you really good suggestions yet, but it gets better all the time. I find that even when I get a bad suggestion, it often gives me an idea for something better than what I would have thought of before. So I think there absolutely, you should use any of the ones I'm talking about, just use something, because it's way better than nothing. We're seeing more tools like, again, GitHub Copilot, Cursor, Amazon Code Whisperer, there's so many of them now, but helping you do things like creating pull requests, automatically writing the comment when you check in your code and you do a commit, starting to see more code review done with AI, automatic code reviews and bug fixing, things like that. So I'd say all of the above. I mean, there's even things out there like Devin, that's kind of AI powered developer, almost replacement kind of thing. I mean, again, early days, they're going to get better over time, and it's going to dramatically change programming as we know it. But for now, most of these things are fairly limited in how much they can do on their own versus you getting a start, and then you do a lot of fixing and tweaking, and some developers don't find that it's worth it. I would say if you've tried it like a year ago and didn't like it, give it another shot, because they are getting better, and start to think about how this will change your development experience day to day, long term, because it's not going away. They just get better. So where can I use it? How can it help me? Can it take away something tedious I don't like to do? Oh, generate all these unit tests. Oh, that's great. Or add this new one, or tweak this code, or add this new button to my React UI, whatever it is. Experiment. They're getting better all the time.
Yeah, we all like having unit tests, but everybody hates actually writing them and dealing with them. So that actually goes back to one of the first polling questions that we had, which is what redeployment struggle is the barrier. I was surprised to see a 50-50 split between redeployment length and redeployment frequency. I expected length to win, but what have you seen there in terms of the impact of redeploys?
Yeah, I think, I mentioned length when I worked at Anthem and waiting over an hour for a compile, right? That was truly horrible. Yeah, no fun at all. I think now with a lot of companies moving to microservices or mini services, macro services, whatever you want to call it, the new rebranded SOA, et cetera, you get smaller parts, so that hopefully means your code bases are smaller and more nimble, so you are able to deploy more frequently. So maybe that's why we're seeing the balance, like some are monoliths and some are microservices, and one you deploy less often and it takes longer, and the other is vice versa. But they're both a pain, right? Because you're getting out of flow if you're a developer, and we talk about how limited your coding time is relative to everything else. You want to really take advantage of every minute before your next meeting or email or Slack pops up. So if you've got to sit around and wait 3 minutes for some code to deploy, and then you got to go log back in and get to the screen you wanted to so you can finally test the thing that you were trying to do, like, you get distracted, right? Oh, something popped up, there's an email, oh, I'm back to my news site or whatever it is, and the time just melts away. So yeah, absolutely anything you can do to preserve that critical flow time, do it, whatever it is.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of things that people do in terms of test selection of, in order to decrease the length, as you go to make a code change, only run tests that are associated with that code change. Or some of the things I do, I help a lot of people deprecate unused code so that they don't have to navigate through it and spend time running tests for code that never runs. So that's why I expected length to win.
That's a great example. People don't think about how important it is to delete code. Yeah, a lot of wins there. Less to keep track of in your head as a developer.
Yeah.
Everything speeds up. Yeah, it just simplifies things for new developers and onboarding, you name it. Yeah, a lot of good wins. And yeah, testing just what changed is great. It's easier said than done, again, depending on your code base and how kind of interweaved it is, and you change one dependency and oops,
Yep.
forgot about that one. It gets kind of tricky, but yeah, any of those techniques and tools, just go faster, CI, CD, parallel pipelines, anything you could do to not sit around and wait.
All right. I want to go in and ask something about one of the last questions of, what strategies are your team employing to encourage developer productivity? Because the biggest winner was definitely lightweight processes. But I've never met anyone who said we need more heavyweight processes. Everybody always wants lightweight processes, but somehow we wind up with heavyweight ones. So what have you seen as the difference between a lightweight process and a heavyweight process, and how do you end up not accidentally creating heavyweight processes?
Yeah, that's a good one. It's always a struggle. I don't think it ever goes away because so think about a code base. Does it tend to shrink over time or get bigger?
Oh God, it's always
shrinks.
bigger all the time, man.
It always gets bigger. Like, when's the last time you updated any Java framework and it didn't bring something new in, some other open source dependency, right? The hierarchy just gets bigger. Every single one of those pieces, somebody's adding code, not removing, as we just talked about.
Right.
So they're all getting bigger over time. It's exactly the same with process. People who are involved with coordinating teams and managing schedules and handling dependencies and dealing with the communication issues and driving company objectives, all those things that happen in a business, are they more likely to go, oh, I got a new challenge, I'm going to go remove some process? No. So it's more like, oh, here's a problem, I know how we can fix that. One more email, one more form field, one more phone call, one more Zoom, whatever it is, you don't take it away. So it's a very slippery slope. It's extremely hard to resist more, just like you're adding to the code. So like you add to the code, ideally you also stop and refactor at some points and think about, how do I deprecate, etc. Ideally you do the same thing with your processes. And if you keep teams small, right, 2 pizza size and things, you need less process. It's just human nature. If you have to talk to, you and I are talking, we can keep each other in sync pretty good. If we had 10 more people, now we spend all day just keeping each other up to date on what's going on.
Yeah, I like to think I'm my own 2-person or 2-pizza team because I tend to like pizza quite a bit, so I don't need other people for that. But yeah, there's the scope of don't make a team larger than the number of people you can feed with 2 pizzas. Because then the communication pattern, if everybody talks to everybody else, you end up with this node where you have too many lines going between it and everybody's got to stay in sync.
Yeah, exactly. A network effect, right? Every time you add one, you add a bunch of new connections, and that's overhead. So yeah, keep teams small. I think that really helps. You have to really consciously, explicitly resist overhead because it comes too easily. So you have to almost have a immune response. Like, whoa, do we need that extra meeting? Do we really need that? Okay, we do. Okay, cool. As soon as we stop really needing this meeting, it goes away. Right? Okay, we're fixing a problem. Great. It's on the calendar for a month, but it automatically goes away. We have to renew it if we want it to keep going. Versus it's on the calendar for the rest of time.
Yeah, I set end dates for all of my meetings that say it's not a weekly recurrence, it's a weekly recurrence up until the following date. So that way I have to manually extend it. And I don't like things that are weekly standing things, even though I do have some of those. So it seems like a common theme of what you're talking about in terms of developer experience is tiered for different roles. For an individual developer, there's a lot about making a problem visible, of saying this is something that's interfering with my workflow. And for a manager, it's about communicating to the rest of the org out to say, I need to defend the productivity of my own team and manage their experience.
Exactly right. I think at every level, you should always be thinking in terms of just enough process. Like go without the process that you think you need until it hurts. And then you add a little bit. Don't go nuts, Don't go like, oh, we need a new process. We're going to set up a Jira workflow and there's 275 fields that are mandatory. Like, okay, no, you don't need that. Really, you don't. Start with the one field or whatever and go from there. Wait till it hurts, and then maybe you have to add another one eventually. But don't assume, don't add, go for the MVP. You don't have to have all the features day one. It's the same thing, like minimal process.
Okay, so start with the minimum and then have just that minimum until you feel the pain and you say, boy, I really absolutely need this other layer of process. And then periodically go look back and say, do we still need that process, or else you'll carry it with you forever?
Exactly right. Yeah, you don't need that baggage to slow you down. If you need it to fix a problem, fix the problem and then be done. And again, it's easier said than done because as humans, we slip into habits and patterns very easily. Like, oh, we have this meeting every week. Why are we still talking about this thing? Did we solve this? Or just lingers forever because we won't make a decision or we won't, kind of move on. And that comes down to focus and priorities. If you know what the real number one is, you don't spend a lot of time on number 17. You just cut ties and move on.
All right. In terms of experience, we've talked a lot about the role of how you manage a developer experience, why you want people focused on the things that they need to pay attention to. And I want to go to the last poll question here of what would your team do with 10% or more developer time? Because we had the winner there was improved performance or test coverage, which is definitely good. The next one was add new features, which is the things that the products teams will always push you for. They'll ask you for new features all the time. That's what I do. But interesting, the one that you said, which is the one that I kind of liked as well, because I'm always going to ask for new features, move up launch dates got 0%, but you said that was the most impactful one. So can you talk a little bit about why you view move up launch dates as the best one there?
Yeah, I think this is more of a lean startup type approach, but it doesn't matter if you're in a team of 3 or a team of 300. You still want to get something out the door. It's too easy to have analysis paralysis set in, or that MVP that keeps growing and growing, and now it's version 6 by the time anybody sees it. It's way better to test your idea in the market to see, does anybody care? Like, we were going to spend 6 months filling out this feature, and it turns out nobody even clicks to get to it. Like, okay, you could have done something that people cared about and would pay for and use. So the quicker you get that feedback, the better, and the quickest way to get feedback is get it out the door, which means do less, see what matters, and then iterate. So yeah, I would always kind of push pretty hard for that, especially if it's a new idea, if it's a new concept, it's a POC, it's a new product, whatever it is, or a big new area of a product. Don't do the huge reinvestment until you're sure, because it's, in my career, it's kind of like asking me we need to re-architect. Okay, great. This is a 4-year project. I don't care what you say. It's 3 months. No, it's 4 years. It's always 4 years. And
it's the big rewrite in the sky. Yeah.
It always looks better on paper. It's horrible. And now you took too long, and now you have to maintain the old one in parallel because the business couldn't wait anymore. And it's 4 years. Don't tell me anything. Don't tell me a number less than that. I won't believe you. So is it really worth 4 years? Well, the answer is almost always no way. Right? So what can you do that's incremental? What can you do with a strangler pattern if you're moving from monolith to microservices? What can you do that's a bite-size approach, one at a time, to see, does this work? Does this matter? Did we improve it? Okay, success, move on. It failed, stop.
Okay, so in essence, the thing that we were talking about before was redeployment length and redeployment frequency in terms of how often it takes for you to get your engineering level feedback cycle, and move up launch dates is like the market feedback cycle of I get more feedback faster to tell me if the thing I'm working on is directionally correct, because it doesn't matter how pure that architecture is if it's going to take me 4 years to get that. I need the feedback that tells me the thing you're doing is worthwhile, you're on the right track. Whether you're super effective or moderately effective, being on the right direction matters more than most other things.
100%. I think that's a great analogy. So if you think about a developer writes code and then hits the button and sits around and twiddles their fingers for 3 minutes, waiting to see something happen, it's exactly what the business is doing when they're saying, here's my MVP list. And then they sit around and twiddle their fingers for 3 months, waiting to see what happens in the market. And if they're not waiting 3 months, they're waiting 4 years because you have the really long redeploy equivalent of the hour build I had to deal with, right? And now the business is going, oh my God, I'm looking at my watch, 4 years have gone by. It doesn't work, right? You're bomb. So think about it's a great analogy. Go faster, do smaller bits incrementally at the coding level, the architecture level, and the business level.
That's even started to happen with Java itself, where you look at the release cadence between different versions, the time spent between Java 6 and Java 7, 7 and 8, it used to be multiple years, but now there's a new Java release about every 6 months, which is rapid enough for developers to adopt. And then every once in a while, there's something called a long-term support release, which is, as a business, if you want to hang out on a major version for a while, pick this one. So they get faster feedback in the JDK.
Exactly, and I think that one of the benefits there is you keep things healthy. Right? You don't have people going, oh wow, it just came out, it's going to be another 1.5 years, I'm going to go do something else.
Yeah.
Right? Instead, they're constantly engaged, so you keep the community engaged, the developers engaged, the architects, etc. It keeps the the language community flourishing and thriving. And yeah, similar analogy, do the same thing with your code, your releases, your products, and you'll keep your own business confident that you can deliver. You've built up trust, and they're like, oh, okay, something comes out every 3 months. Great, I never have to question that something's going to happen. I may not be happy with as much as I got, but I know I'm getting something, which is way better than going, oh man, it's been quiet over there for 9 months. I'm getting really nervous.
Yeah, so, what's happening on that team?
Moving. Exactly.
All right. Are there any other things? It's about 1:57, so we're coming up towards the time of the webinar, and I want to be mindful to the people who do have to go to their meetings, which is something that no developer enjoys. But just, are there anything else that you want to add in terms of monitoring developer experience?
I guess I'd leave with the final message of if your developer is suffering through some of the things we talked about, let somebody know. Make sure you make it visible. I have too many tasks. We have too many meetings. Why did we add that new mandatory field to the JIRA thing? Why can't I pick my own tool? I'm sitting around wasting my time on redeploys or whatever. Let someone know. It's their job. It's your job to let them know. It's their job to do something about it, but keep reminding them. Be a little bit persistent. You have a right.
All right, excellent. And thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Feel free to get in touch with Perforce for anything you need, especially JRebel in terms of managing your Java redeploys.